Last week's budget has been more positively received by Australian voters than the government's 2017 offering, according to the latest Guardian Essential poll, and more people think the major measures will be good for working people. But there is also resistance to providing tax cuts to higher-income earners, and substantial resistance to the government's controversial plan to flatten the income tax scales, as well as a degree of cynicism about the coalition's motives. Sign up to receive the top stories from Guardian Australia every morning. The poll, commissioned to chart the political impact of last week's economic statement, finds that 44% of a sample of 1,027 respondents approved of the coalition's fifth budget, while 28% disapproved, which is a rosier reception than last year's budget was given. People on low incomes were less likely to approve of the key measures than people earning more than $2,000 a week, with 30% approval from people earning less than $600 a week compared with 51% approval from voters higher up the income scale. There is also skepticism about the practical impact. More people think the income tax cuts won't make a difference to their household, or they won't receive them, than think they will make a noticeable difference to their cost of living pressures. Only 24% of the sample thinks the budget is good for them personally, up 6% since last year. Voters under 35 and people on higher incomes are more inclined to think the tax cuts will make a real difference than other voting groups. A majority, 62%, thinks the budget is more about improving the government's popularity than improving the economy. A sizable majority of voters, 79%, are cool on the third phase of the government's tax plan, the controversial component of the package that would flatten the income tax scales and lead to people earning between $41,000 and $200,000 paying the same marginal tax rate. Most think people earning $200,000 should be paying a higher rate of tax than people at the bottom of the new tax bracket. The sample is divided on whether or not Australians on higher incomes should get a tax cut. 40% say yes and 44% say no. More than half the sample believes the budget is good for the well-off, and a sizable chunk think it will be good for Australian business, 45%, the middle class, 42%, and average working people, 40%. Compared with the 2017 budget, more voters think this year's offering, which includes tax cuts for people earning less than $87,000, will be good for average working people, up from 22% to 40%. People also feel it is positive for Australian families, up from 25% to 35%, and for people on lower incomes, up from 20% to 35%. But politics is also front of mind for many voters. A majority of the sample, 62%, thinks the budget, likely to be the last one the government delivers before calling a federal election, is more about improving the government's popularity than improving the economy. A slimmer majority, 56%, thinks the budget doesn't do enough to reduce the deficit and is more beneficial to the haves than the have-nots, 54%. The Budget in a Minute with political editor Catherine Murphy video compared with responses to last year's budget. Respondents were more likely to think that the 2018 outing doesn't do enough to reduce the deficit, up 15% to 56%, and the budget is more about delivering the coalition a sugar hit than about boosting the economy, up 11% to 62%. Even though the Guardian Essential poll the week before the budget suggested voters were more interested in governments boosting social spending than offering tax cuts, the post-budget environment has created a turnaround. 39% say they support the income tax cuts over paying off debt or funding schools and hospitals, while 30% would rather investments in health and education, and 18% want deficit reduction. Low-income earners were the most negative about the budget, with 65% of people earning under $600 characterizing it as disappointing, while only 31% thought it was fair. In terms of its impact on the economy, and on perceptions of the government's capacity to manage the economy, 28% said the budget increased their confidence and 23% said it decreased it, a marginally more positive response than in 2017. The results in the New Guardian Essential Survey are in line with other opinion polls in suggesting that the budget has delivered no outsized turnaround in the coalition's sustained negative poll trend. There has been a slight positive movement in the polls' two-party, preferred measure post-budget, with Labour now ahead of the government 52% to 48%, compared with last week when Labour was ahead 53% to 47%. That movement is inside the polls' margin of error. The major opinion polls published by media outlets post-budget now have a spread of two-party, preferred results, with Ipsos, Fairfax Media, putting Labour ahead 54% to 46%, Newspoll, News Corp putting Labour ahead 51% to 49%, and Guardian Essential falling between the other two surveys. The government has now lost 32 consecutive news polls, although recent surveys suggest either a tightening of the contest or a sharper measurement of the distribution of preferences. The government did not win a Guardian Essential poll during 2017, and has not prevailed in any survey this year. Despite the regular hype about so-called budget bounces, they rarely deliver an immediate political result. But the coalition is hoping the $140 billion it has promised over a decade in personal income tax cuts for both low and middle-income earners, and higher earners down the track, will mark the start of a political recovery that will project it positively into a federal campaign. Bill Shorten used his budget reply speech last week to up the ante over tax cuts to low and middle-income earners, almost doubling the government's proposed cash rebate, and promising more generous social spending, funded by medium-term savings and revenue measures. Both Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull will face considerable pressure in coming months. The dual citizenship imbroglio has triggered a handful of by-elections in marginal seats, a mini-election over the coming weeks, where both sides will campaign on their respective tax plans. The Prime Minister can call an election any time after August, but has been at pains to send a public signal that the real poll test won't be until early in 2019.